work on getting it all done before the hour, because this is my last Sunday, and then Heather's back next week to start us off.
When do you leave on board? Right.
Oh, end of July.
Oh.
So, assuming all goes well.
That's life.
With our life, we have to buy big insurance packages on travel, lest everything goes south. Yeah. But we're hoping that won't be the case. This is one that's been planned for years to get all the siblings and spouses together. So we hope it will go well. Okay, so what I want to do, as I've said before, in Joshua, and it kind of sounds like we were more into the story in the first half of the book of Joshua, and now all of a sudden we're done, because much of that in between, and Barb was telling me when she was reading up the dividing of the property, the land for the tribes, she recognizes the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River, but all the other landmarks and divisions, unless you've got a good map there to sit with, you're not going to get a great deal out of. So you have about, what do we have? 7 chapters maybe of the dividing up of the land. And I'm not going to sketch those out for you. If you have a study Bible, or just Google some Bible maps, they can show you how the land was divided. But remember, it is divided by allocation. That doesn't mean that they ruled the whole area. What it does, the book of Joshua ends with this allocation, and they took most of the big cities, so there's not an active warfare and resistance, but they don't drive out everyone or kill them off. And for good or for bad, part of the result is that these people intermingle and many of their practices of worship. We like to think of the Israelites coming out of Egypt as this holy people, all totally committed, and Joshua does his best, right? He re-celebrates the covenant. We have that description as they cross over Jordan, and they do the circumcisions. For those who haven't, they did the Passover. Then they recommitted to the covenant right after Jericho. And then at the end of the book, you again have Joshua doing his best to get these people online, but many of them clung to, and you get an example of that as we talked in that final challenge. Who do you want to serve? Choose who you want to serve. Do you want to go all the way back before Abraham and those gods that are the other side of the Euphrates River with Abraham's history? Or do you want the gods that were down in Egypt? Choose you this day, right? A nice, great challenge in Joshua chapter 24. at the end. And many of them were worshiping still their household gods and their from their experiences earlier. So,
Well, I guess that it sounds like you sound that he was probably really mad when he said choose. Wouldn't yell,
I think he is discouraged. I'll go to the bottom thing on your handout and just comment on that. The book of Joshua is a very positive, optimistic. Now, whether this is reflecting Joshua himself, which I assume it is celebrating. Look what God is doing for us. Yeah, it has those little hiccups, and but the people loved him, we're told. Their allegiance to him was great. And the people, by and large, clung to the faith well through his lifetime and the other elders that hadn't died off right with Joshua, particularly Eleazar the priest, the son of Aaron. So you have three of them, Aaron, Eleazar, and
Phineas? Something like that?
Philetus.
Okay,
No.
that's with an PH.
He's,
Phinehas, Phinehas. That guy?
okay. Get this all cranked up here. So people that they had confidence in and who apparently were good, strong men of the faith. And the book ends that God gave them peace. They clung to worship as they should through the lives of these elders and Caleb, presumably from the sound of the story, we don't have exactly when he dies, but he seems to outlive Joseph, likewise. And there was peace, meaning by and large there's not an active revolt of the Canaanites in the land. But much of the land that was allocated was not actually conquered fully. But the book is so celebrative that you get that feel. Then immediately you go into Judges, and the book of Judges is a downer all the way through. I used to like the period of the Judges, but the more I read it, the book of Joshua is positive, God's at work, yay, let's go for it, let's enjoy the peace then that he's giving to us. The book of Judges is finding fault with the people all the time. It's focused on their shortcomings, right? Every time that, and the people turn away, God has to raise up a judge, charismatic leader, often in a small area, not the whole of Palestine, right? In these stories of the Judges. But you go through that, the writer of the book of Judges is very critical of the loose system, the civic system, and yearning for kings. In fact, its writing is presumably after the first kings, at least Saul, perhaps David, somewhere in there. And presumably it's also written by the priestly class, which are the educated class, right? And those people who do that sort of writing and reading. They're not out plowing the field so much. and the writer is pessimistic. His view is when people are left to themselves, the way it's described in the scriptures, each man did what was right in his own eyes. And so household worship, whatever, but there isn't a big centralized worship. And the writer of Judges is looking forward to and wanting centralized, enforceable government and religion. And this will solve our problems. Well, of course, we have the history, and the getting of the kings didn't solve the problems. It brought in other ones that had some good positive things. But really, you're dealing with the heart of man, right? You're not dealing with, much as we hear all these things in our own political divisions today, people and governmental forms are not going to make us God's people. And whether you fit into the political spectrum on the left or on the right, it's not going to be solved with that. Because the issue is the heart of man. But that's the nature of the two books. So if you're reading and making your way through, you will note that, I assume you will note that difference in tone between Joshua and Judges. And so even though they haven't taken the big cities of the Philistines, the 5 big cities down there on the coast, they've handed them over to Judah, right? This is your land. And even the big Phoenician city further up the coast, the eastern coast of the Mediterranean, Tyre and Sidon, they've allocated this to one of the tribes. But those were never taken and controlled. There were good trade relations with the Phoenicians, and the skilled artisans from there were the ones that were brought in to build the temple and the palace.
There has to be some.
Joshua sends out his surveyors. Yeah, they track the land, draw up their maps, valleys, the rivers, the hills, and then they draw straws. Which tribe? Yeah, it's like the football draft, right? Whose turn to draw? Draw lots. Who gets next? Okay. Here's how it's divided up. Which part do you want? And that's how they allocate about 2/3 of the land. The first third had already been given, right? To whom?
Manasseh.
Half tribe of Manasseh, Gad, and Reuben. On the east side, and then the south end, below Bethlehem and Hebron, and as it goes into the desert down in the south, Judah had been given its big thing. Actually, the book of Judges begins with a new set of battles and says, okay, we still don't own the whole land. Who's going to be the first to take us on? And it is the tribe of Judah, and they talk to the tribe of Simeon. And Simeon's land is landlocked inside Judah's. I'm not sure how that worked, but I suspect it may have had quite a bit to do with Caleb.
So what tribe was Joshua in? Judah?
No.
Is it something?
He is allocated land of his own,
Okay.
but he is in one of the northern tribes. Sorry,
It
Oh,
says
and I
here,
don't have my
it says here Ephraim.
Ephraim.
Oh,
Okay, so he's about 2/3 of the way from the Dead Sea up the Jordan towards the Sea of Galilee. Up about 2/3 and just over in the plains there. And there's this valley that heads out to the Mediterranean. So there's sets of mountains there on both sides. And that has been kind of central control for the battle. But remember, these were not standing armies. These are separate tribal units that probably fought under their own banners. And there was this recognition that every man, there's not something wrong with you, you fight for the team. And so particularly, we would grab this table back here and put them on the front lines. They're young and strong and energetic. But as we know, Caleb is 85 and he says, hey, I'm as vigorous as I was when I was 40, and apparently had a phenomenal influence, which the size of Judah's land, and that Caleb himself gets the whole area by Hebron, which he points out to Joshua. Remember when we came back as the 12 spies, Moses told me I get the land I trampled on in that trip. So make sure that's appropriately assigned, give me the deed. And Caleb was no doubt one of the big generals, certainly the leader of troops through his clan and maybe all of the tribe of Judah.
I think it's amazing that we could go on.
yeah.
And today's lesson, a nice transition. As I wrap up the book, we have a strange story. It is the story when they pretty much dominated, certainly the big cities. Canaanites still lived there, particularly up in the hills, and no one really wanted to go fight in the forests. A Robin Hood sort of thing. They're in there somewhere, but who wants to take the chance of going after them? And in chapter 23 is a strange story. So one last big takeaway is when he calls them and thanks them. He has been impressed with the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. And he says, thank you, guys. You have been faithful to your promise. And he says, it's the time has come to let you go back, take your phenomenal haul of plunder. He spells it all out. All the herds, all the wealth, probably meant a few extra wives, a few extra children, everything, who would either be incorporated into the family or become the slaves. But they have taken great plunder, and he says it's time for you to go back. So I want you to make sure you read that story. Look, got the wrong book showing up there. Of what happens at this stage. So, beginning of 22, the eastern tribes return home. And as Joshua always does, But be very careful to keep the commandments and the law of Moses, the servant of the Lord, that the servant of the Lord gave you. To love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him, to keep his commands, to hold fast to him, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. And Joshua blessed them and sent them away, and they went to their homes. That's the upbeat Joshua. It's always seeing the bright side to things. And then we have, if you look at verse 8, return to your homes with your great wealth, large herds of livestock, silver, gold, bronze, and iron, a great quantity of clothing, and divide the plunder from your enemies with your fellow Israelites. So that's the victorious thing.
Well, I know, I don't know very much, but, I'm thinking all of this. They played on, this new land.
From the Canaanites, yeah, they had cleared out Og, and so that, wish I had mapped on a screen, but you have a general sense even of Palestine. There's the west side, which is pretty much fully divided amongst them. And on the eastern side, you have to go a little above the Dead Sea. And because you have Moab and Ammon, and they don't completely drive those out, right? And those traditionally are thought of as the children of Abraham through Esau. So they feel something of a familial responsibility, but also enemy. But a little above the Dead Sea and north, under Moses, they had taken all of that land. That's when it was divided to these 2.5 tribes. But now these guys are going, and what do they do? Who knows this story?
They built an altar.
They built an altar or a memorial.
Yeah. And everyone's mad.
They are really mad.
Yeah.
And here's the takeaway, right? When you lose sight of who the enemy is, you fight amongst yourselves. Now, I've been with this church for 50 years and through many battles over painting the paneling, right? Those of you that look around you at white walls. Those were panels, cream-colored panels. We came in one day and they're all painted white. Carpeting, pews versus chairs. We have battled amongst ourselves so many times. And the bad news is that many that you still keep as good friends went off and said, no, not for me. I'm going to find somewhere else. How painful. And this is what's happening here. Have you read the books, The Hunger Games?
Yeah.
Or watched the movies? Yes? No? Do we know the story? Okay. So they have this, is it an annual festival? And one from each of the 12 tribes, 13 tribes, how many? 13 were there. Oh no, one had already been, anyway. And they're put into this artificial dome, and they have to kill each other. So an old gladiatorial style, like, until one emerges as the only one left standing. So the book is all about these games that celebrate, if you will, if you're one of those who couldn't be chosen, you're more likely to celebrate it than if you were out in the districts. And so our heroine is one of those chosen, and she wins. And then the big man at the top of the hill, the president, got to find some way to get rid of these people causing him trouble. And he comes up with the idea of this quarter, what's it called? Anyway, where on the 75th annual gladiatorial thing, they choose just those who had been winners already. If you were a winner, you were supposed to live your life out in comfort. And only those who win are now competing against each other. And before Katniss, our heroine, goes into this, what's his name? Our alcoholic. I should have made sure I know the stories if I'm going to use them.
The Woody Harrelson character?
Woody Harrelson, yeah.
Oh,
And
Hamish or something like that.
Hamish,
Yeah.
there we go.
Yeah.
Good for you. Yeah,
And
don't watch it over and over.
tells her, don't forget who the real enemy is. And that's the key to that third movie, then, is remember who the real enemy is. Because they're put in a setting where everyone's the enemy. But they really aren't. And without her knowing, of course, there's this big rebellion plot that has been planned. And many of those that she considered the enemy, in fact, are there deliberately to keep her alive to the end, because she will be the figurehead for the rebellion. Remember who the enemy is. That's the takeaway, right, for today. Because what happens when these guys build this altar, and it's a little hard for us to understand why this is such a big deal, but the rest of the tribes think they are somehow usurping national worship, and that they, recently blessed by Joshua, are somehow better than them and are claiming God for themselves. And they pull their troops together, and 10 tribes are ready to march across the Jordan to fight 2.5 tribes of their own. They have forgotten who the real enemy is. They didn't get the cities of Gath and Gaza from the Philistines. They didn't get Tyre. They didn't get the hill country with the guys hiding out in there, shooting the king's deer, whatever. But they're ready to battle each other. And the mentality I've always found a little hard to follow there. But the misinterpretations of fact, I mean, this is the United States in 2023, right? Something is taking place, and others are saying this is what they mean by it, and this is what it implies, and therefore they are the enemy. And we will fight each other over these. Now, luckily, we have a go-between. We have a mediator. But the tribes of Israel, right? I'm in, so we're in chapter 22:15. When they went to Gilead, to Reuben, Gad, the half-tribe of Manasseh, they said to them, the whole assembly of the Lord says, how could you break faith with the God of Israel like this? How could you turn away from the Lord and build yourselves an altar in rebellion against him now? I don't know how without social media, they spread this idea that the 2.5 tribes were setting themselves up somehow, separately, to their own God, or to the God, but pulling him over. The altar is still built on the west side of the Jordan. How could you do this? And now we're ready to take you on. And the 2.5 tribes say, what are you talking about? This is our expression of faith in God. And the very fact that because we're across the river, we were afraid that one of these days your descendants are going to say to our descendants, you don't belong. And so we're putting up this monument, this altar, not as a separate worship thing, but as a reminder of what we've just gone through for the last 10 years, whatever. And so Aaron's grandson is there, and he plays the mediator. Phinehas, son of Eleazar the priest. And so we know we have 3 good guys here. Aaron always had a bit of a, not too sure about Aaron. He's the one who built the golden calf. He swayed with public opinion. I think he took polls and decided what his position should be. But Eleazar and Phinehas are respected holy men. And Phinehas pulls this thing together and averts civil war. And what a reminder that even in victory, God's people have a tendency to go wrong because they forget where the real enemy is, who the real enemy is. And they find every other thing that they can fight about. Even those things that are deliberately done as an act of worship, which Reuben and Gad try to explain that. No, this is our act of worship and what we all belong with. And it nearly is the downfall of at least a big chunk of the people. So the takeaway there is when you forget who the real enemy is, and that we are dealing in our society not with really even some of these expressions of what we might deal with as rebellion. The war is for the hearts and minds of people, real people, in bringing them to the Lord. It is not really, much as this dominates the conservative religious world, it is not really about abortion. It is not really about these items that we are fighting. Yes, we may object to some of those things, but those things are not going to be solved by governmental decrees. You just aren't going to be able to accomplish that. And we're going to watch this in the years now that follow. And of course, Biden just made an executive order that says all federally okayed drugs must be available to the people. You see, government can't solve these things because they're not really behavioral things that if we change, we've brought people closer to God. In fact, the church in our day, fighting amongst itself, is probably at its lowest ebb of witness in our world, because the rest of the world doesn't understand and accept things that we believe are true expressions of commitment to God. And so we fight amongst ourselves. And the pandemic, with its wars over should you be inoculated or not, Franklin Graham getting into it, on the other side, the editor of Christianity Today. And the church has spent its time warring when people are hurting, when people need the strength of one another. Okay. Yeah. And Shirley's just giving me the signal, so I will get off that. But the takeaway is when you lose sight that you're working with real people who make individual decisions, that's where the work of the Lord is. To love, to care for, to bring to a knowledge of the Savior. And it's not about what law we can get passed that Wisconsin won't do or Iowa won't do or whatever. And so the map that they put on the news every night, or the maps, and blue maps and red states, blue states, whatever, as we tear ourselves apart.
Well, you know, the Catholics are better than all the books of the Protestants. You see that one thing.
See, she's a book of Judges kind of person. She wants central control. Whereas what is Joshua, the book of Joshua ends with, choose you this day. And the book of Judges is, we need a king. We need the religious center. Okay, let me take the takeaways then. That's what you have. If you miss them in all my digressions, or if you just missed them for whatever reason, this is what I thought we looked at during the quarter. The first two grand takeaways that we focused on for a few weeks at the beginning of the quarter, as we looked at the beginnings with Moses getting ready to be leading the Exodus, was that there are two strands of history. There are two sets of things taking place. God is at work within the world. He is at work with nations. There is a big, grand stream of history, and God is still in control. And the Exodus story is that story. But at the same time that God is fulfilling his promise to Abraham through the grand story are the individual stories. And so I tried to take us to Moses' struggles, not Moses as the grand leader, which we usually study, but instead his failings, how he almost gets killed by the Lord because he hasn't been faithful in his own family life. That he hasn't recognized that what he's going after is a covenant people, but he hasn't taught his own children and circumcised them. Right? So we looked at, I tried to take this as these two grand truths, these flows of history. The international story that is God fulfilling his promises to Abraham. But the second is your decisions make a difference. God is also interested in those. And whether you are the top dog in the picture, like Moses, his individual decisions meant he would never enter the promised land. And that was important as the guy who said, I'm going to worship the golden calf, right? And so we took some of these people individually to see that. Moses, Aaron and Miriam, Caleb and Joshua, Rahab, Achan, that are in that story at the individual level, while the grand flow is also being worked out. So those are the two grand takeaways, if you will, that I hope to give to you out of this. Then are the 8 takeaways from the story of Joshua. First things first, we looked at Joshua's personal commitment, alone with God, being ordained as the new leader, and they crossed the Jordan. And we all think the first thing that happened is Jericho's walls fell, but no, it's a recommitment as the covenant people. And so Joshua's covenant experience, and he even did what Moses, as the big heroic leader, didn't do. So we looked at that. And then first things last, as I jump from the beginning of the book to the end and show that this leader was uniquely committed and consistent as an example and as a leader from the beginning of his life, and as he's mentored by Moses to the very end. And as his life is coming to the end, he has another grand party, right? Recommitment to the covenant. This is why I love Joshua. So first things first, first things last. C, personal sin destroys both the individual and the community. A personal sin is not just an unnoticed thing. The story of Achan and his personal rebellion illustrates that for us. Be wary and avoid overconfidence. Love that. Bill pointed out in the story there, they didn't check with God about these Gibeonites who came and deceived them, right? Old tattered clothes, looked like they'd come from hundreds of miles away. And they come up with, so don't let your own overconfidence, because the walls of Jericho fell down, that all is well. And they end up with a problem. And that problem is in the next takeaway. Your word is your bond. And I've tried to show that there's a bit of a struggle with those who said, no, they deceived us, so our pledge to them is void. And the others who recognize that everything we do in life is because of who we are and in our relationship with God. And they argued that, no, we pledged before God, so it stands and we will stand by our word. Even so much that when the Gibeonites call on Israel, they go and do battle for them. So our decisions, our commitments are not just with another person. They're always with God. I'm getting the throat slit here, folks. So, last week we did, there remains very much land to be possessed. Right? No matter how much of it you control, there's some battles to be fought. And the book of Judges will remind you of that if you go into that first and second chapters of Judges. He actually lists all the people that are still in the land. So instead of the optimistic view of, celebrative view of Joshua, you jump into Judges and it's, here's what they didn't do. Here's what they left them problems with. God used these people then to test them. So there remains very much land to be possessed. Get on and work. And Caleb, of course, comes back into the picture, ready to take it on. G was today's, remember who the real enemy is. Always remember. who you're fighting. You're not fighting political battles. That's not what this is primarily about. We are fighting for the lives, for the souls, for the hearts of people. And H, which we kind of did at the beginning of the series, but I would have eloquently tried to make the point again. Choose you this day. Now it's to you. Joshua has come to an end, and he's challenging his people. He doesn't know what all the future will hold, but he has been faithful, and he would love his people to continue on being faithful. And he gives that nice State of the Union, rah-rah, I belong to God. Do you choose you this day whom you will serve? So that's what I thought I was doing for the last 13 weeks. If you missed it while I was doing it, now you have it on paper where you can go back and review. Great book. We need positive things in our lives, and this is what for our faith. And H.M. Snow. Do you know what we're studying next week, Heather?
Indeed, and next week we will begin Paul's prison letters with the book of Philemon, actually.
Okay, back into the New Testament, and you'll get a little of Paul's optimism and commitment with the prison letters. Our Father, you have had your hand upon your people for thousands of years. We want you to have your hand on us and direct us in faithfulness, for we would be faithful. We want to be faithful. We want to enjoy the victories, not the curses. We pray for the blessings, not the curses. For we would be personally obedient in our calling to be your people. Be with us then in every aspect of our regular lives. Be with us particularly in the worship hour. We do this every week to call on you as you have promised, so we claim that even where 2 or 3 are gathered together, you are in our midst. We claim that. We want that because we want to express to you our worship, our praise this Lord's day. Be here with us, we ask, through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Thanks, Wayne.
Thanks for all your work.